we get so conditioned to do what we're supposed to do at such an early age, right? I mean, like as soon as we start entering school, we are starting to be conditioned to do the thing that we are supposed to do. And, part of this is about fitting into society and being able to contribute and all of that. I'm not saying that we just need total anarchy. That is so not mine. That is not my soapbox at all. But we get so conditioned to start doing all the things that we are supposed to do that by the time that we become, fully independent adults somewhere in our late teens and early 20s, maybe even early 30s, it's hard for us to start separating out what it is that we're doing because it's what we're supposed to do versus what it is that we want to do that is our natural tendency, behavior, thought pattern, action, whatever. And that self-reflection is actually way harder than it sounds because we haven't used this phrase in quite a while on the show, but I know we've used it before. It's hard to read the label from inside the jar.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how.
Forcing yourself to follow business models that leave you drained will success feel much harder than it really needs to. So if you are constantly fighting your own nature in business, today's episode is for you. And today's episode, I am going to guess, Gwen, is going to be a whole lot more you than it is going to be about me, because I feel like you are somebody who is so good about helping other people understand. I'm just going to say it like I see it, which is how they are doing themselves a great disservice by following what everybody else is telling them to do.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, because as you well know, I very much believe that there are lots of right answers, and rarely is there a right answer. There could be a best right answer for you, but that very likely is a very different best right answer than what it is for me.
Yeah, and I find that I don't know. It's funny is I see you having a lot of conversations with folks who maybe come to you because, they've tried everything and it hasn't worked and they just don't know what else to do. And so they come to you and you frequently will say, well, it sounds to me like everything you've tried is great advice for other people, but I don't see it being great advice for you. And then you tend to observe something in them that nobody's ever brought up. So I'm wondering, maybe if you could just kind of kick us off with, why is it important to pay attention to who you are and what you like and all of that good stuff, like what you bring to the table before you start deciding which advice to follow and which advice to maybe set aside?
Well, so obviously this goes back to the title of the show, The Business You Really Want. But I think the trick here is we get so conditioned to do what we're supposed to do at such an early age, right? I mean, like as soon as we start entering school, we are starting to be conditioned to do the thing that we are supposed to do. And part of this is about fitting into society and being able to contribute and all of that. I'm not saying that we just need total anarchy. That is so not mine. That is not my soapbox at all. But we get so conditioned to start doing all the things that we are supposed to do that by the time that we become, fully independent adults somewhere in our late teens and early 20s, maybe even early 30s, it's hard for us to start separating out what it is that we're doing because it's what we're supposed to do versus what it is that we want to do that is our natural tendency, behavior, thought pattern, action, whatever. And that self-reflection is actually way harder than it sounds, because it's hard. We haven't used this phrase in quite a while on the show, but I know we've used it before. It's hard to read the label from inside the jar. And so sometimes part of what I am bringing is I am outside the jar. And when I bring up something, it's like, yes, how did you know? And from my standpoint, it's like, it seems pretty easy. I think I can, I can see this. But the other is I'm good at asking questions that get to that information fairly quick. And it's because I'm asking questions that seem completely random and unrelated to what's actually going on. But what I'm looking for is, what are the things that are more instinctual, natural, what are the things that you're going to tend toward? And I think that if we aren't doing the things that we tend toward, that's another cause of burnout that I don't think anyone talks about. Mm-hmm. We talk about, overwork and, all of the things that we would typically associate with burnout. But burnout really is about energy. And so when you're having to work against your natural energy, that's always going to lead to burnout, even if you're able to do it successfully. And even if you like the result, but it's against your natural tendency. I think that part of where we're getting burnout and overwhelm, well, people are being surprised that they're burnout and overwhelmed because it's not the typical reasons. Just these subtle reasons.
And it sounds to me like you didn't say these specific words, but it reminds me of the fact that working, like using skills that you have developed over time, maybe even skills that you're really, really like, it's just something you're really good at, is not the same as working within your natural strengths. And I think sometimes we get confused between the two of those.
Mm-hmm. It's the, strategic coach, I think, is the one that talks about it well. And it's also in The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, of being in your zone of excellence versus being in your zone of genius.
Okay. And for people who aren't familiar with either strategic coach or The Big Leap, explain the difference.
So the idea of, and I'll be honest, I struggle with this too. So I'm not going to give a great definition of this, but zone of excellence is that you achieve, you're exactly what you said, you're good at, you're able to do it. You get, positive feedback, you succeed, 98% of the time at whatever it is. But zone of genius is that it is so natural and intuitive for you. Often you don't even notice it. And the bigger issue for some folks, and I've seen it in a lot of people in my world, both personally and professionally, it's so intuitive, you assume that it has to be easy for everybody because it's so intuitive. And so you don't give it any credit at all because it's so second nature. It's like, well, but of course everybody does this. It's like, no, almost nobody else does that in that way, in that combination of things. And it's usually not a thing. It's 5 or 6 things, the way that they all work together that make this very, very unique thing. And so zone of genius is often hard to figure out for people because they just can't see it as a genius for themselves, where excellence they've usually had to work at some point or another.
So I know that there's 1,000,001 assessments that people can do out there, right? There's strengths.
And I know most of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's like there's strengths finders, there's Colby, there's Enneagram, there's working genius.
There's
personality type.
Working genius. Yeah. There's YOS. The list goes on and on and on.
We will not list all of them. But I think those are one way to figure out what your natural strengths are. But I think what's like more helpful really is to be able to sit down and identify the business activities that leave you energized versus the business activities that leave you drained, and kind of to figure out like sort of what's left there. Is that your approach, or do you have a different one?
It's a bit of that. And it's one of the things that I find a lot of business owners who've taken what sounds like good advice in, growing their business have often given away one of the things that really was their zone of genius. And then this is, kind of back to the reason we started this podcast way at the beginning was, and then they want to burn down their business because they hate their business. Well, you hate your business because the thing that you actually loved, you're no longer doing. And so to me, that's another example of it. You have to be careful, even if it happens to be one of the things that's not highly valuable in the business. Cause that's the first thing. It's like, oh, you have to get rid of all the things that are highly, that aren't highly valuable. Yeah. But what if one or two of those actually is part of your energy. Because we don't look at it we only look at it from a dollar standpoint. But what if, we talk about all the time, so it's not a big secret. I love doing my own bookkeeping. So what if taking away the bookkeeping from me actually is reducing my energy?
Mm-hmm.
Could someone do it cheaper than what my hourly rate is? Oh, for sure. For sure. But is the energy giving me energy for other things and other discussions and other places? We don't ever ask that question.
Right.
We just look at the dollar equation. And so, we've said for a long time, and one of my other clients is I've got only one. Everyone else is so happy to give away their bookkeeping. But I have one other client who's really kept their bookkeeping way, way, way past when they probably should. And even I've encouraged them to give it away sooner, and they haven't been willing to do it. But they now see that it's not really giving them the energy, and it's starting to hold the business back.
Mm-hmm.
My business is nowhere near that yet. I could see it getting there, that there would be a point that's like, okay, yeah, I actually need to give this up now. Because the energy dollar, the whole equation, not just the dollar equation, but the energy and the dollar and the time equation actually makes sense to give it up. But I think people are giving up a lot of their high value in terms of energy pieces away early because they aren't always high dollar value. And I think that becomes part of the problem. But I think we don't think about energy, and we don't think about what we love, because the business has so many pieces to it, especially when you first start out, right? Because you are wearing every hat all the time, switching all the hats. I think it's hard to determine which of these hats are the hats that are really my energy hats. From the beginning. And I do agree. I think the assessments help, but I think often we can go to more instinctual answers and probably get as good or better answers.
Yeah. So how does somebody figure out their natural instincts then?
So I was recently exposed to this, and it's still being refined. But the concept of saying, what did you just get lost in and love doing when you were a kid? Kind of in that 8 to 12 sort of range is one way to think about it. Because in that 8 to 12 kind of range, you're able to start remembering things that you did when you're in kind of that 8 to 12, maybe not specifics, but you can remember, kind of conceptually things that you did. But you probably didn't have a whole lot of constraints put on you yet about what was right and what was appropriate, and all of those things, right? Like, did you love playing in the dirt? At some point, it's like, oh, you're not really supposed to play in the dirt anymore. Even if you still really liked playing in the dirt, right? And so, it's thinking back to like, what are those things that I just really, really love to do? And looking at them in big, giant swaths to say, are there similarities? Did I really like doing all of this stuff mostly by myself? Or did I really prefer it when I was with a big group of people or a little group of people, or when I was on a team versus when I was doing an individual sport? Some of those things start helping you figure out, like, if you're somebody, and like, well, I'll just use me. I liked mostly doing individual things, but I was also good doing them in small groups with 2 or 3 other people. And although I have run a team, I've run a department of nearly 100 people, and I was actually pretty good at it. I would call that zone of excellence. I was good at doing it, but I also know I don't want to grow a business that's that big anymore. I'm okay with a tiny team.
Yeah.
Right. And so that limits some of the things that I can, build when I'm building the business I really want. That probably means I'm not building an 8 or 9 figure business. If I really, really want a tiny team.
Yeah.
I could potentially, but that's more of a fluky kind of thing, as opposed to like a really plan. We're going to make this thing happen. Could I build a 7-figure business? Yeah, sure. Possibly. That's very feasible, depending on, lots of other factors. 8, 9, probably not. And if I go back and look, it's like, oh yeah, whenever I've been in those environments, those are some of the times that I have been happiest. Even when I worked at Ernst & Young, which is a, giant multi-international firm, I actually worked in a department that kind of didn't even exist as a department, with 3 other people, and like, I didn't even think about it till just now, but it's like, oh yeah, always finding the little group. right?
Yeah.
The smaller group. So
So
that
smaller group, even within a very large
even within a large group, still saying, but these are my people. I know all these people are here, but they're not my people. These are my people. Right. And so I think, that's an important piece. One of the things you and I talk about all the time and comes up a lot is I am both an outside person and an inside person. Mm-hmm. I always had hobbies that were outside based as well as hobbies that were inside based, about equal. And so I'm as happy being outside as I am inside. Where I have not been able to make this job work, this job is very much an inside job. But the day that I can be like in a really good screened in porch in the right temperature space, screened in because bugs love me way too much. That'll be perfect because I can be both outside and inside at the same time. Like I can imagine what that is and how that's perfect for me. We don't always get to have everything we want, but these are some of those kind of themes that you start looking for. I've always been an extrovert versus an introvert. Mm-hmm. I have a very good sense of time, which means I am really pretty good at winding up a call within a minute or two of when the call is supposed to be done. So for me, a back-to-back schedule where I finish a call at noon and then I start one at noon and I finish it at 1 and I start the next one at 1 actually works for me because I can actually manage my time really, really well. I know what an hour is, even when I don't have a clock in front of me. And so I'm able to manage that going forward. But if I was someone who had a less natural sense of time, which a lot of people don't have a good sense of time, and not that that's a right thing or a wrong thing, just natural thing. That back-to-back schedule is really, really hard for them. Well, I'll talk about my husband. My husband does not have that same sense of time. He is the exact opposite. And often he's a vice president. So he has a lot of meetings he goes to. And the days that he has back-to-back meetings, he is almost immediately running behind after the first one because he doesn't have a good sense of time. Which means he shows up at the next one late and blah, blah, And unless one gets canceled or something happens, it's like, yeah, it's good to catch up today. And it's like, yeah, I'm not surprised. So designing your business to work toward as many of those natural things, that means that's not taking energy away from you because it's just the way that you work.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that, I think, leads us to a next natural question, which is, if somebody here's something that you've made me aware of that I think is invisible to a lot of people. I don't think everybody knows naturally what the business structure is that they've built. So, I mean, just an example, right? It's like, I know people who don't actually know that they have a service-based business. And I think everybody knows whether their business is a product-based business, right? You know that you sell a tchotchke of some sort. Right. Yeah. You sell a thing, right? You either sell a thing or you don't sell a thing. Some folks are actually in service-based businesses, but they're operating as if they're in product-based businesses. For instance, photographers, I think a lot of times think they sell a product. Well, not so much these days because many times photographers are out there, they're doing their photos and then they just make a gallery of the photos they took available. But, back in the day, they thought they sold print. Mm-hmm. And the 4 hours that they spent at your wedding was a vehicle in which to give you your wedding album. But these days, we acknowledge that a photographer is actually a service-based business. We acknowledge that graphic designers, even if they give you a bunch of Canva templates or a bunch of Canva designs, that's a service that they provide. Whereas coaches and consultants, oftentimes, right, they understand that they are service-based. But even that, I mean, some are like project-based services and some are ongoing, like retainer-based services. So I'm wondering if maybe what we could talk a little bit about are what are the business structures that complement different natural tendencies. So the person who thrives on personal connection, like I always look at like, are you a people person or are you a systems person?
Right. There's folks that really like interacting with people. And I'm going to say it this way, and it's going to sound harsh, but those who know will actually like quietly raise their hand. There's people who like people, and there's people who don't actually like people.
Well, and what I would say,
yeah, and it's not an introvert or an extrovert thing. That's one of the things people confuse.
No. Yeah,
I know introverts who love people, and I know extroverts hate people.
So somebody told me this, and it was one of those things where I was like, oh, because I am not an extrovert, and I genuinely like people. And this person was an extrovert, and they said that, they used to love to say, especially when they were working retail, they loved to say that they were a people person. Like that's why they liked retail. And they had a boss that said, you can't say that you are a people person unless you like people on their bad days too. And that was new information for them because they did not like people on their bad. Like they liked people, they liked having conversations, they liked being surrounded by people. But what they realized is in a retail environment, when it came to a customer having a complaint, they wanted nothing to do with that customer. They wanted to go hide in the back room and let somebody else deal with it.
Right.
So you're right, is being a people person, really liking people is not the same as being an extrovert.
No, yeah. And what they were showing was their extroversion, but not their people liking. No one really likes to be around people on their bad day. I mean, nobody does. But can you do it? Do you find it interesting? Are you curious about it?
Yeah,
right?
I totally am. Like,
right. And I am too.
Yeah.
So why is that happening?
Yeah. Like I love, when I'm working with online communities, there's always the person who is like super duper grouchy or easy to offend. And I'm the person who loves to explore that. I don't want to hide. I don't want to ignore them and hope they'll go away. I really want to connect and see what that's about, because maybe it is something we're doing and maybe it's not. So for the people who thrive on personal connection, where are some good business structures or business models maybe that are good for them?
So personal connections, definitely that one-on-one model makes a lot of sense because you're really getting to know a person and getting into it, and or what I'm going to call small group environment or regular, interaction. And when I mean interaction, I mean like more like the DMs kind of, kind of interaction where there's a lot of there's some back and forth so that you're getting to know people as much.
So I'm just going to throw in some models there that I have seen and heard. So, okay. So coaching, one-on-one, small group coaching, having some kind of, if you're going to be a course creator, having some kind of live delivery or live interaction, whether that is a Q&A call, whether that is, DM, email support, maybe. What about the people who, Voxer coaching? I'm a big fan of Voxer coaching.
I know you are. I didn't put it yet. That's okay.
That's okay. That's all right. More for me, I will say. What about those who prefer systems?
So those that prefer systems are generally going to be more on either on the automated side of things like courses, definitely more in the group program where they're controlling the conversation as opposed to lots of just ask me anything kinds of conversations, right? Because sometimes group programs, it's like, so you're going to if you have questions on module 2, come on Wednesday because we're going to address module 2. That is not a people person. That is a systems person. We're staying in this box that we have predefined, those kind of things. I think, some of these I'll call it product/service providers that you're talking about, like the graphic designer or the web designer or the wedding, photographer, can be either depending on how they approach the business and how they design it. So like a web designer or a graphic designer could mostly have you fill out a form and have everything go back and forth in a much more asynchronous, sort of way. Obviously, like a wedding photographer probably needs to be a people person, because if anyone's going to have a bad day, it's either probably going to be their best day and or their worst day, possibly both. You're going to have to deal with that. Maybe you have an assistant who's dealing with all of the people piece, right? You're just really good about making sure we're going to get every one of these shots. We're going to do it just the way they want. We're going to be able to do it really efficiently. So the photography thing does not end up taking an hour and a half, but we're done in 20 minutes so they can go on to the reception and do that, so I could see that crossing the line depending on which way you want to approach it. I do, like I said, I do think courses, And also I think fixed length programs also fall into folks that are more system. We're going to do A, then we're going to do B. When we get to, step K, we're done, whether you're done or not, that's not my problem. We've taken you through all the steps. If you've done all the steps and kept up with us, you should be done too.
Okay. What about detail-oriented versus big picture thinkers? What are the options there?
Detail-oriented are definitely going to fall more into what we would call operational type roles. So accounting type things, any of the VA administrative, SOP writing, all of those kind of things can be in the web and the graphic design, as well, depending on how you're doing it, where the big picture thinkers definitely are going to be more in the coaching, consulting, strategic, kinds of things. Not that you can't be both and not that you can't deal with the other, but where do you have the most?
Okay. How about creative versus analytical personalities?
Generally, big generalization, but still, generally it's the same answer as above. Most of the time, the visionaries are also see themselves as more creative, and the detailed-oriented people usually see themselves as more analytical. There can be some there can be some crossover and some slightly different looks, but I find those line up very, very closely 85% of the time.
Okay. So this question...
Is your experience different on that?
Yes and no. So I do know creatives that are more detailed. It's like the details are what help them to be creative. I do think your analytical personalities, though, are almost always detail-oriented. I don't see analytical personalities being big picture thinkers, but I do see some creatives being more on the detail-oriented.
And there are some strategic thinkers that can also be very analytical.
Yeah.
But like I said, I think it's like an 80% kind of those two line up.
Yeah. And I also feel like those are one of those things where you just kind of like there's enough overlap also in different business models and structures that you can benefit in those. So our last episode, we talked a lot about high touch one-on-one services, being a business, like a popular kind of business model right now when we're recording this. But I want to address just briefly your take on adapting whatever business model is popular to fit your strengths. So, because, taking that people person, right? If high touch one-on-one isn't in vogue and what's really in vogue is DIY, self-study courses that people can buy and take at 2 a.m., it may sound like, oh gosh, well then I just can't be successful in an online-based business right now. But that's not necessarily true. So what are your thoughts on how do you adapt what a popular business model is to fit your strength?
So my first thing, and we talked about it last time, I'm going to stick to it because I really think it's important, is if what really gives you energy and makes you light up and you do a really good job at, even if it's not the popular thing, if you stick with it, you're gonna outshine. And not like, I don't think you always have to adapt. That's the first thing. And I think that's one of the things that we get caught in because of all the social media, all the conversations, all of the group chats, all of the other thing is like, oh, if you don't do this, your business is going to fail. I am not actually convinced of that. It could, but I doubt it's just because you didn't do this one thing.
Fair. But I am going to actually jump in here, and because I've seen you do this, and this is one of those things where I want to give you space to talk about how you do it, and yet at the same time, I want to acknowledge that for you, it's so intuitive that you don't necessarily know that you're doing it.
Okay, well, and there we are.
So, it comes across maybe as a brag if you bring it up, but less so if I bring it up. But when I look at some of the offers that you have, so let's just take your group program, for instance, because I think this is actually a really good example of, you are somebody who shines one-on-one because you do really well if you can work with somebody on a deep level, have enough time and space to ask them hard questions, give them time to just sit there for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, silently processing without pressure that, oh my gosh, it's somebody else's turn next, so I have to shut up or I have to answer quickly, whatever comes to mind. Right. You do really well working with people in that kind of environment to get to the heart, what you would call the root cause, to really help them dig into what they really want and what the best way is to get what they really want, so on and so forth. And so, it would be very easy for you to say, well, I have to work with people one-on-one. That's the only way I can do it. But you figured out that, you actually can have a group program. How you've adapted that model, though, to work to fit your strengths and how you best know you serve clients is that your group program is one group meeting per month, whereas a lot of group programs, they'll have you meet weekly. You'll meet with the group once a month, and then you meet with them 2 weeks later one-on-one. So,
yeah, and as you were saying that, I thought, I appreciate you bringing this up as an example because you're right. It is an adaptive example of it. And the other thing is, I know if I grew that group program to 100 people, the one time a month wouldn't be enough for the bulk of the people. So the first thing I said was, we're going to keep the number of people on the call small so that everyone potentially has not just a 2-minute time, but everyone really can take 10 minutes of time, give or take, with a question and a thoughtful answer, and other people can chime in, and we don't have to say, no one else can say anything. And we don't necessarily have to keep a clock on it, cause sometimes that will create undue pressure that doesn't need to be there. If we didn't have the clock, they would actually do better
right.
than if they do have the clock. Right. So that was one of the pieces. And when we were talking about what happens if it grows, I immediately went through a process that said, oh, well, we could open up another group and let everyone know they get one meeting. They can choose A or B until one of them is filled up. And then once everyone's had a shot, then if there's spaces, people can come to the additional one, because I'm okay with that as well. Right. But part of it was saying, no, we're going to limit the number of people that actually can get on.
So you have
to be able to still do enough one-on-one interaction still within a group.
Right. Well, and what I have seen, only because I've observed a couple of times your group. And so there's this 90-minute time where they're all together, right? And they get that group interaction. They get to kind of mastermind with each other, so to speak. But if something comes up that is deeper, or if you get so far, let's just say they need to cover 5 steps and they only got to step 3, then it really is helpful for you to be able to say, actually, we could go a little bit deeper during your one-on-one session, and they only have to wait 2 weeks for that.
Right.
And they don't have to book something else. And right. So you've made this work, to your strengths, to how you feel like you best provide value. And it's very different from what most people think of when they think of a group program, even if they think of a group program that includes some one-on-one time. So that's, I think, just a really good example that I would encourage anybody listening when we're talking about adapting sort of what you see out there being popular, what people seem to be buying like hotcakes, and you're like, I want a piece of that pie, is to just think, how do you best deliver value to clients, and what is a piece of what you see being on trend that you could either add, or maybe that you could replace as it made sense. Maybe there's something that's a little bit lower value that you could replace, but to be thinking about that.
Like, let me give another example.
Yeah.
That I think people have been dealing with. I think they're getting past it now, but I think it's still a great example. Is for there was a time that everything was about the launch.
Oh yeah,
about the launch. We do the launch, and we get 1,000 customers, or we have $100,000 launch, or $1 million launch, or whatever, and then the launches started fading for whatever reason. And I'm not even going to try and go into any of the reasons that it could be. And so the question is, does your program actually need the launch, or could it be evergreen? And if it does need the launch, does it need it as often, or could it be less often, or could it be more often? Like if you're only launching once a year and it's not a very big launch, could you launch once a quarter instead? And, but back to, do you actually need a launch? Some things really do run as a cohort and you kind of need a launch. You need everyone to start at kind of a similar time. It's another place that we did an adaptation. I've never been a big fan of launch for lots and lots of reasons. But we realized for our weekly course of action that it made better sense to onboard people at kind of a similar time so that they had a certain amount of experience before they joined our quarterly planning session. And we realized that by putting a launch time, even though that made a few people had to wait and they could have had a little more experience, it's like, no, but it makes it easier so that we know this group's kind of coming in together.
Right. So that's a prime example of just shifting things that make sense for you, for your business, for your customers, for what aligns with your natural strength. Before we close, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the obstacles that get between thinking like, oh, that sounds like a good idea, and actually doing it, right? Because you alluded to this earlier in the episode, or actually you directly talked about how one of the biggest barriers to making your business about your strengths is believing that it can't be profitable because it's too easy. It's so easy for you. There's no way you could make money at doing it.
It's true. Yeah.
Right. So I am just going to say to our dear listener what was said to me, because this was the exact conversation I had. And I still remember I was sitting in a cubicle in 2017 and I was on a break and I was having a conversation about like kind of if I was to have a side hustle, right? Because I was in grad school and I was like, oh yeah, it's just they were like, well, kind of like, what are the things that you do like to do? And we're talking about all sorts of things. And then we're talking about social media being really popular. Like, okay, well, what about like doing social media? And I was like, oh, well, that's my day job. And they kind of just stopped and said, at no point in time in the conversation had I ever mentioned that I was a social media man. And they were just like, well, but if social media is your day job, why don't you just like offer it, not competing with what you do as your day job, but to a different market, a different industry. And I was like, oh no, it's kind of easy. And they both, the two women who were advising me at the point were like, well, it's easy for you, but it's not easy for anybody else. And usually when we're looking at side hustles, we want to do something that's easy because we don't have time, energy, or space to do something that's really hard. And I was like, oh, really? But in my mind at that time, there was no way I could ever charge anybody a decent price for social media management because it's just how my brain works.
If for me, when I started this business in, I don't know if it was 11, 12, 13, 14, something when I really kind of started doing this as kind of its own thing. I had been doing it in a particular industry and was like, well, I kind of know about that industry, so it's probably okay. And I thought, no, the type of stuff I'm doing though is not industry specific. It's broader. It's broader. But my thought was, do I actually know enough to do this any industry? And, it wasn't until much later when someone actually made me count, I realized how many industries I actually did know about. That was like a whole different conversation. But this was before that conversation. And so I approached it in a slightly different way, which was like, well, let me just try something outside and see how it goes. And so I threw it out as a, kind of a free thing to just test it out and say, can I actually provide this kind of strategic insight, valuable thought, make it worthwhile? And I did it with like 3 or 4 completely different industries. And it was like, maybe I can. And so that's when I opened it up outside of the very narrow industry that I had been working in and realized it's like, oh yeah, because this actually is easy for me because it's not about the industry. It is about seeing the way I see things. And it's about me questioning the way that I question things, which works for any industry, right?
Right. Well, and also because the way that you work with people is so personalized. Anything that's industry.
That was part of it, is because I was working with them one-on-one. What I realized was, context matters, and that I could get to their context quickly. And that was actually what was valuable.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like you could personalize it. So it didn't have to be about, everybody in this field always does that.
Yeah. And
so,
and that was my natural tendencies. I've always been able to get to someone's context really, really quickly.
Yeah. So if somebody's listening and going, okay, this sounds good. And you know what? There are some things that I might like to do more of, do less of. What are some questions that they could be asking themselves in terms of getting to how to do more within their natural instincts, their natural tendencies, what they're naturally good at, and maybe doing less of the things that are harder or take more mental bandwidth?
So the first always is, go back to thinking about what really has always been natural for you. And looking for those common threads, whether it's, being inside, outside, groups, teams, creating or, building or, what are those things? Where do you find those themes? So start there so that you've got something that you can kind of look toward. And then ask yourself, what of the things that I'm currently doing either fall pretty clear into it, not at all into it, and what's kind of on that, kind of gray, sitting in the grayscale, right? And the things that aren't, so ask yourself, do I need these? That's the first question, is do we actually need to do any of the things that are this is not in my strengths at all? Or is this something that I decided we should do because I was reading it on the internet? Back in the day, we used to talk about when the CEO read the airplane magazine. It's like, oh my gosh, they just found a new technology on the airplane magazine that doesn't apply to us at all. Same type of thing. Did you see something on social media, decided you should do it because everyone's doing it and it must be the thing.
Right.
But when you look at it, it's like, this is actually not at all in my wheelhouse in any form. Drop those things off. If they are things that you actually want to be doing, then you have to start asking your question of, can I think about doing this in a completely different way? Which means we have to let go of all of the standards, all of the expectations, all of the normal things. But the good news is, unless I'm really misunderstanding who our listenership is, you guys are all visionaries and creatives. This is actually in your wheelhouse, but I think we don't use it a lot on ourselves. I think we save all of our visionary creative processes for our services, for our clients, for our whatever. I don't think we think about applying it to our own selves and our own business. And part of it is because it's hard to read the label from inside the jar. So you may need to get some outside perspective as well that say, this is the thing I know that I need to keep, but I don't like it being done this way. Someone else might be able to help you say, oh, well, you thought about doing it A, B, or C. And often as soon as you hear it's like, A, no, B, maybe, C, yes. And then you could start redesigning to make that thing happen. But I would look at the things that are absolutely a no fit first. And then I would also look at the things that are absolutely a yes fit and see if they can be amplified, and then deal with the gray. The gray is always tough. We leave the gray to the last.
Yes. And that is actually the perfect segue into a brand new resource that we have available called Breaking the Burnout Cycle. So it's an assessment and action guide to help you identify your natural strengths, pinpoint where your current business model is working against you, and provide a step-by-step plan to transform your business while supporting your well-being. You can get that at thebusinessyoureallywant.com/burnout, and that will allow you to download your copy today. So like Gwen said, those of you who are visionaries, who are so good at doing this for other people, this is just a resource to help you do it for yourself, to write down your results so that you don't forget them.
Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallywant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.